Of course, aliens look like us. Why wouldn't they? Think about it. You've got a planet. It's got water. It's got sunlight. It's got some rocky surface with weather and tides and seasons. And on that planet, life starts up. Well, what's life going to do? It's going to face the same problems any living thing faces. It needs to eat. It needs to move. It needs to sense its environment. It needs to reproduce. And if the problems are the same, the solutions ought to be the same too, right? That's the argument. And it sounds very convincing. It sounds so convincing that it fooled some extremely smart people for a very long time. Evolution, they said, is a great optimizer. It finds the best answer. And the best answer to how do you build a creature that can think and manipulate its world is, well, something like us. 2 legs to walk, 2 arms to grab, a head up top full of brain with eyes in the front, bilateral symmetry, carbon chemistry, DNA, the whole package. That's completely wrong. And I can show you why. But I want to be fair, because the people who believe this are not fools. They have evidence, real evidence, from right here on Earth. And we're going to look at that evidence carefully. We're going to take it seriously, and then we're going to watch it collapse. So let's start with the strongest version of the argument. There's a phenomenon in biology called convergent evolution. It's one of the most beautiful patterns in all of nature. Here's what it means. You take 2 species that are not closely related at all. They live on different continents. They have completely different ancestors. And yet they evolve the same solution to the same problem, independently, without copying each other. The eye is the classic example. Eyes have evolved independently, something like 40 to 60 separate times across the animal kingdom. Insects have eyes, octopuses have eyes, jellyfish have eyes, and these lineages split apart hundreds of millions of years ago. They didn't inherit the eye from some common ancestor. They each invented it on their own, because light is useful information, and if you can detect it, you survive better. Simple as that. Flight is another one. Birds fly, bats fly, insects fly, pterosaurs flew. 4 completely different groups, 4 completely separate inventions of the wing. Because air is a medium, and if you can move through it, you can get food and escape predators that the ground-bound creatures cannot. And there's an even stranger one. Crabs. There's this bizarre tendency in crustacean evolution called carcinization, where unrelated lineages keep evolving into crab-shaped things. Hermit crabs, squat lobsters, king crabs, they're not all closely related, but they keep converging on the same flat, wide, armored body plan. Something about that shape just works in certain marine environments. So the argument goes, if evolution keeps finding the same answers on Earth, surely it'll find the same answers on other planets too. An Earth-like world will produce Earth-like creatures. Give it enough time and you'll get something with 2 legs, 2 arms, and a big brain. Something that looks more or less like us. And it's not just body shapes. Consider streamlining. Dolphins, sharks, tuna, and ichthyosaurs, which were ancient marine reptiles that went extinct with the dinosaurs, all independently evolved nearly identical torpedo-shaped bodies. Different lineages, different eras, different ancestors. Same shape, because water is dense, and if you want to move through it fast, physics only gives you so many options. The fluid dynamics doesn't care about your DNA, it cares about your cross-section and your drag coefficient. Or look at Africa and the Americas. In the deserts of Africa, you've got euphorbia plants. Tough-skinned, spiny, water-storing, built to survive brutal heat and drought. Cross the Atlantic to the American deserts and you've got cacti, completely unrelated to euphorbias. Different family, different continent, different evolutionary lineage. But they look almost identical, because the problem is the same. How do you hold on to water in a place where it almost never rains? The solution converges. Simon Conway Morris at Cambridge has pushed this idea further than anyone. He wrote entire books about it. He says convergent evolution is not an oddity. It's the rule. Everywhere you look, you see it. The camera eye, the streamlined body, echolocation in bats and dolphins, even warm-bloodedness, which evolved independently in birds and mammals. And he argues that intelligence, tool use, big brains, these are also convergent features. They should show up wherever evolution runs long enough on a suitable planet. With reasonable confidence, he once said, something analogous to a human would evolve on any Earth-like world. Now that is a beautiful argument. Elegant, clean, seductive even. And I believed something like it for a while. Because when you line up all those examples, when you see the eye evolving independently 40 or 50 times, when you see wings invented 4 separate times, it really does feel like evolution is following a script, when you like there's an inevitability to it. But then I started asking questions. And the trouble with a beautiful argument is that sometimes it's beautiful the way a magic trick is beautiful. It shows you exactly what it wants you to see and hides everything else. Let me show you what's being hidden. First question. If convergent evolution is so powerful, if it keeps driving life toward the same solutions, then why are there so many things on Earth that evolution only invented once? Think about that. The eye evolved dozens of times independently. Flight evolved at least 4 times. But elephants evolved exactly once. There is nothing else on this planet, now or in the entire fossil record, that looks like an elephant. Nothing with that body plan. Sauropod dinosaurs were big herbivores, sure, but their design was fundamentally different. Long necks, tiny heads, pillar legs arranged differently. Not elephants. What about the platypus? A venomous, egg-laying, duck-billed, beaver-tailed mammal with electroreception. Evolved once. Nothing else like it, anywhere, ever. Sloths, once. Kiwi birds, once. The entire body plan of an octopus, with 8 flexible arms, 3 hearts, and blue blood, essentially a one-time invention in the history of life. Stephen Jay Gould, the great paleontologist, made this point devastatingly. He said if you could rewind the tape of life on Earth, go back to the Cambrian explosion 500 million years ago, and let it play forward again with slightly different initial conditions, you would not get humans, you would not get anything that looks like humans. You might not even get mammals. The specific sequence of accidents, extinctions, climate shifts, and mutations that led to us is so improbable, so contingent on details, that running it again would produce something completely different. And he had evidence for this too. The Burgess Shale, a famous fossil deposit from the Cambrian period, shows an astonishing variety of body plans. Creatures with 5 eyes, creatures with no obvious head, creatures with body architectures that don't match any living animal group. Opabinia had 5 eyes and a forward-facing nozzle that looked like a vacuum cleaner hose. Hallucigenia was so bizarre that when scientists first described it, they got it upside down. Anomalocaris was a meter-long predator with grasping appendages and a circular mouth like a pineapple ring lined with teeth. These weren't failed experiments. Many of them were successful. Dominant animals in their time. Most of those body plans went extinct. Not because they were bad designs. Some of them were probably perfectly functional. They just happened to be in the wrong place when the environment changed. Or they lost a competition by a hair's breadth. Or some asteroid hit, or some ice age came, and the survivors were the survivors for reasons that had nothing to do with being optimally designed. Here's a thought that should make you uncomfortable. There was an extinction event about 66 million years ago. An asteroid hit what is now the Yucatan Peninsula and wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. Before that asteroid, mammals were tiny, scurrying, nocturnal creatures hiding from reptilian predators. If that asteroid had missed Earth by a few thousand kilometers, dinosaurs would likely still be the dominant large land animals, and mammals, including the lineage that led to primates, including the lineage that led to us, would still be small and marginal. No humans, no humanoids, no big-brained bipeds, on our own planet, because of one rock. And by the way, some paleontologists have asked, could dinosaurs have become intelligent? In 1982, Dale Russell at the National Museum of Canada actually tried to imagine what a smart dinosaur might look like. He took Troodon, a small dinosaur with a relatively large brain, and extrapolated forward. He came up with what he called a dinosauroid, and guess what it looked like? A little green man, upright, 2 arms, big head. It looked like a human in a dinosaur costume. Another paleontologist immediately called him on it. Darren Naish pointed out that a brainy Troodon descendant would far more likely retain a horizontal body posture and a long tail, and would probably manipulate objects with its snout and feet like a bird, not with little hands. Russell had unconsciously projected the human body plan onto a completely different lineage. Even our imagination defaults to us. That's the first crack in the argument. Convergent evolution is real, but it's not universal. It works for certain specific problems. Detecting light, moving through fluid, streamlining your body in water. But for the big architectural questions, the ones that determine what kind of creature you are at the deepest level, evolution is astonishingly creative and astonishingly unpredictable. It does not converge on one answer. It explodes into a million answers, and which ones survive is largely a matter of historical accident. So here's crack number 2, and this one goes deeper. All the examples of convergent evolution I just gave you, the eyes, the wings, the crab shapes, every single one of them happened on the same planet, in the same biosphere, under the same gravity, with the same atmosphere, in the same solvent, which is water, using the same chemistry, which is carbon, with the same genetic system, which is DNA. Do you see the problem? When we say evolution keeps finding the same solution, what we really mean is evolution keeps finding the same solution when the starting conditions, the physical environment, the available chemistry, and the rules of the game are all identical. That's not a prediction about what will happen on a different planet. That's just a statement about what happens in one particular sandbox. Change the sandbox and everything changes. Let's talk about that sandbox. Let's talk about what makes Earth, Earth. And then let's imagine carefully and honestly what happens when you change the variables. Start with gravity. Earth's surface gravity is what it is because of the planet's mass and density. About 9.8 meters per second squared. That number shapes everything about how large organisms are built. It determines how thick your bones need to be relative to your body weight. It determines how tall a land animal can get before its legs can't support it anymore. It determines how much energy it takes to move. On a planet with twice our gravity, you would not get tall, upright, bipedal creatures. The physics doesn't favor it. You'd get something low, wide, close to the ground, strong and squat. On a planet with 1/4 our gravity, the constraints reverse. You could get enormously tall, spindly things, fragile by our standards, but perfectly functional there. So already the humanoid body plan, the 2-legged upright walker with a big head on top, is tuned to a narrow range of gravitational conditions. Change the gravity, and that design fails. Now think about atmosphere. Earth has a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere at about 1 bar of pressure. That specific combination determines what kind of respiration works, what kinds of materials are stable, how far sound travels, how much ultraviolet light reaches the surface. A thicker atmosphere changes everything. On a planet with an atmosphere 10 times denser than ours, sound travels differently. Vision works differently because light scatters differently. Creatures might rely on sonar instead of sight, or pressure waves, or chemical sensing. The very idea of having 2 forward-facing eyes optimized for binocular vision in clear air, that's a solution to Earth's atmosphere. It's not a universal solution, it's a local one. And here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the chemistry. Every living thing on Earth, from bacteria to blue whales, uses the same basic molecular toolkit. Carbon as the structural backbone, water as the solvent, DNA or RNA as the information carrier, proteins built from amino acids, lipid membranes to make cells, and all of that chemistry runs in a temperature range between roughly -15 degrees and 120 degrees Celsius, because that's the range where water is liquid or nearly so, and where carbon-based molecules hold together without falling apart. We look at this and we say, well, that must be how life works. But is it? Or is it just how life works here? Carbon is a spectacular atom for building complex molecules. It has 4 bonding sites. It can form long chains, branching structures, rings. It's extraordinarily versatile. And it's common. Carbon is the 4th most abundant element in the universe by mass. The universe is practically littered with the stuff. But silicon, sitting right below carbon on the periodic table, also has 4 bonding sites. It can also form chains and complex structures, not as easily, not as flexibly. Silicon bonds are weaker because its outer electrons are farther from the nucleus, shielded by inner electron shells. Silicon dioxide is a solid, a crystal, not a gas like carbon dioxide. So silicon-based creatures couldn't exhale their waste the way we exhale carbon dioxide. They'd essentially be exhaling sand or glass. That sounds like a deal breaker. And on Earth it is. But here's the thing people forget. The reason silicon chemistry fails on Earth is because Earth has conditions that favor carbon. We have liquid water. We have moderate temperatures. We have an oxygen atmosphere. Under these conditions, carbon chemistry is dazzlingly versatile, and silicon chemistry is clunky and limited. but change the conditions, and the comparison shifts. At very high temperatures, silicon-oxygen bonds become more labile. At very high pressures, new crystal structures form. On a world with no oxygen in the atmosphere, silicon wouldn't get trapped in those stubborn silicon dioxide crystals. The game would be completely different. Nobody has built a silicon-based organism in a lab. Nobody has found one. But the point is not that silicon life definitely exists. The point is that we cannot rule it out based on conditions that are specific to our planet. And it's not just silicon. Researchers have identified entirely different chemical systems that could potentially support self-sustaining, self-reproducing chemistry. Autocatalytic reactions, which are reactions that produce the very molecules that catalyze them, creating self-reinforcing chemical cycles. Think of it like a fire that makes its own fuel. These reactions don't require carbon. They don't require water. A study from the University of Wisconsin-Madison cataloged hundreds of these autocatalytic cycles based on different elements and different conditions. Some work at temperatures where carbon molecules would combust. Others work at temperatures where carbon molecules would be frozen solid. Some use sulfur, some use nitrogen compounds, some use metals. The chemical space of possible life is vastly larger than the small region we occupy. Now think about what that means. If life can arise from fundamentally different chemistry, then everything we associate with life is local. DNA is local. Proteins are local. Cell membranes are local. The entire architecture of every organism you've ever seen, every organism that has ever existed on this planet, is built on one chemical foundation, and we are extrapolating from that single example to the entire universe. That's like visiting one house in one city and concluding that all houses everywhere must have the same floor plan. Let me push this further. Think about the solvent. Water on Earth is the medium in which all biochemistry happens. Every chemical reaction in your body takes place in water. Water is the stage on which the play of life is performed. And water has very specific properties. It's polar. It forms hydrogen bonds. It's liquid between 0 and 100 degrees Celsius at 1 atmosphere. Those properties shape what kinds of molecules can exist, how fast reactions happen, and what structures are stable. But what if the solvent were different? Consider ammonia. Ammonia is liquid at much lower temperatures than water, between about -78 and -33 degrees Celsius at 1 atmosphere. It can dissolve many of the same kinds of molecules that water can. It's a polar molecule like water, so it supports many of the same types of chemical interactions. On a cold planet where water would be frozen solid, ammonia oceans could provide a perfectly functional medium for chemistry. Slower chemistry. Yes, lower energy reactions. But functional. Or think about sulfuric acid. Venus has clouds of sulfuric acid droplets. Sulfuric acid is an excellent solvent for many types of reactions. It's harsh by our standards, destructive to the molecules we're made of. But an organism that evolved in sulfuric acid would be built from molecules that are stable in sulfuric acid. That's not a contradiction, it's just different chemistry. Or formide, or supercritical carbon dioxide, or liquid hydrogen at extremely low temperatures on a gas giant. The biochemist Stephen Benner and the Astrobiological Committee, chaired by John Barros at the National Research Council, looked at all of these alternatives seriously. Their conclusion was striking. They found, and I want to be precise about this, no compelling reason to limit the environments for life to water as a solvent. That's a formal scientific committee funded by NASA, saying we cannot scientifically justify the assumption that life requires water. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is Titan, Saturn's largest moon. On Titan there are lakes and seas of liquid methane and ethane. And ethane, not water. Liquid hydrocarbons. The surface temperature is about -179 degrees Celsius. Way too cold for water to be liquid. Way too cold for any carbon-based biochemistry that we know of. But the landscape is eerily familiar. Titan has rain, rivers, shorelines, erosion, weather patterns. It's the only other body in our solar system besides Earth with stable liquid on its surface. The liquid just happens to be methane instead of water. Some astrobiologists have speculated that life could exist there, in those methane seas, using a completely different chemical toolbox. An organism in liquid methane would face different challenges and use different solutions. Its molecules would be held together by weaker forces. Hydrogen bonds, which are so important to the structure of our proteins and DNA, barely work in liquid methane. So whatever holds alien Titan molecules together would be something else entirely. Van der Waals forces, maybe, or something we haven't categorized yet. Its metabolism would be slower, its entire being would be constructed from a catalog of materials that we would barely recognize as biological. Chris McKay at NASA has argued that if life exists on Titan's surface, it would probably use hydrogen as an energy source, reacting it with acetylene and ethane. It would breathe hydrogen the way we breathe oxygen, and its waste product would be methane, not carbon dioxide. There might even be a detectable signature of this. If Titan organisms were consuming hydrogen and acetylene near the surface, there would be a measurable depletion of those chemicals in the lower atmosphere. And some data, tantalizing but not conclusive, has hinted at exactly that. Nobody is claiming this is proof of life, but it is exactly the kind of anomaly you'd look for. Such an organism would be in every meaningful chemical sense alien. Not alien in the science fiction sense of human with funny ears. Alien in the sense of built from different atoms, in a different liquid, running on different energy, encoding information in a different way. And here's the thing that should keep you awake at night. We might not recognize it as life at all. That is the deep problem. Not just that alien life would look different from us. That's obvious once you think about it. The deep problem is that alien life might be so different that our instruments wouldn't detect it. Our definitions wouldn't include it. Our minds wouldn't categorize it. Let me tell you something about DNA that most people don't realize. DNA uses 4 chemical letters: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. That's the alphabet of life on Earth. Every organism from a bacterium to a baobab tree uses the same 4 letters. And for a long time, people assumed that this 4-letter alphabet was somehow special, somehow optimal, somehow inevitable. It's not. In 2019, a team supported by NASA created synthetic DNA in the laboratory with 8 letters instead of 4, 4 standard ones and 4 new ones. They called P, Z, B, and S. This expanded genetic system, which they called Hakimoji DNA, stored information and maintained its structure just like natural DNA. It worked. Other researchers have gone further, creating entirely new genetic polymers called XNA for xenonucleic acids. These use different sugar molecules in their backbone, completely different from the deoxyribose in DNA or the ribose in RNA, cyclohexene-based nucleic acids, glycol-based nucleic acids, threose-based nucleic acids, all created in laboratories, all capable of storing genetic information, all completely absent from natural life on Earth. What does this tell you? It tells you that our genetic system is not the only possible one. It's not even close to the only possible one. Our 4-letter DNA alphabet, written on a sugar phosphate backbone, is one solution out of an enormous space of possible solutions. And every one of those alternative systems could, in principle, serve as the informational foundation for a living organism on another world. NASA has a working definition of life. They've used it for decades. Life is a self-sustaining chemical system capable of Darwinian evolution. Notice what's not in that definition. There's no mention of carbon, no mention of water, no mention of DNA, no mention of cells. In principle, that definition is open to any chemistry, any structure, any system that sustains itself and evolves. But in practice, every instrument we've ever sent to another world was designed to detect Earth-like chemistry, carbon compounds, water signatures, oxygen, methane. The biosignatures we look for are the biosignatures that Earth life produces. That's a bit like searching for dolphins by listening for English. Dolphins are intelligent, communicating creatures, but they don't speak English. And if your dolphin detection device is a microphone tuned to human speech, you'll conclude the ocean is empty. A team called the Laboratory for Agnostic Biosignatures, or LAB for short, has been working on this problem. Sarah Stewart Johnson at Georgetown University started it after realizing how deep the bias runs. They're trying to develop detection methods that don't assume any particular chemistry. Instead of looking for specific molecules, they look for signs of chemical complexity, signs of order that couldn't arise from simple geological processes, signs that some system is maintaining itself far from chemical equilibrium. Because that, they argue, is the true signature of life. Not any particular molecule, but the presence of a system that is fighting entropy. That is, organizing matter in ways that chemistry alone wouldn't predict. And here's a key insight from their work. When Antony van Leeuwenhoek first saw single-celled organisms through his microscope in the 1670s, he called them animalcules, meaning little animals. They weren't animals at all, but that was the only framework he had. We're doing the same thing on a cosmic scale. We're looking for life-icules that match our framework, and we might be staring right at something alive and dismissing it because it doesn't fit our definition. That's a profound shift, and it tells you something about how narrow our imagination has been. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you grew up in a world where every musical instrument was a piano. Every piece of music you'd ever heard was played on a piano. Every theory of music was built around the properties of piano keys. Now someone asks you, what would music sound like on another planet? And you say, well, it would probably involve 88 keys arranged in a row with hammers hitting strings. That's not a prediction about music, that's a description of one particular instrument. Music is far bigger than the piano. It's rhythm and harmony and melody and timbre. It can be made with strings, with air columns, with vibrating membranes, with electronic circuits, with the human voice. The piano is one instance, not the archetype. Life is the same way. Carbon, water, DNA life is one instrument. The music of life, the deep principle underneath, is something much more general. It's any system that captures energy, maintains its own structure, stores information, and produces variations of itself. That principle could be implemented in carbon, or silicon, or in chemistry we haven't imagined yet, on surfaces, or in atmospheres, or in the deep interiors of gas giants, or in places we haven't thought to look. Now I want to come back to convergent evolution one more time because I think there is something true in it, something real, but it's not what people usually say. What's true is this: physics and chemistry impose constraints. If you're moving through water, a streamlined shape reduces drag. That's not biology, that's fluid dynamics. If you need to detect electromagnetic radiation, you need some kind of structure that can absorb photons and transduce the signal. That's not biology, that's physics. These constraints are universal. They apply everywhere in the universe. So yes, if there's a planet with liquid water and swimming creatures, those creatures might be streamlined. If there's a planet with an atmosphere and light, creatures might have something that detects light. But streamlined doesn't mean looks like a fish, and detects light doesn't mean has two eyes on a face. The constraints are real. The specific solutions are not predetermined. Think about all the different ways Earth organisms detect light. Humans have camera-type eyes with a single lens and a retina. Insects have compound eyes with thousands of tiny lenses, each capturing a slightly different angle, building a mosaic image that's nothing like what we see. Scallops have dozens of eyes with mirrors instead of lenses, curved reflectors made of guanine crystals that focus light the way a telescope does. Some single-celled organisms have light-sensitive eye spots that are barely more than a chemical patch on their surface. Pit vipers detect infrared radiation with special organs between their eyes and nostrils, building a heat map of their environment that lets them strike warm-blooded prey in total darkness. The mantis shrimp has 16 different types of photoreceptor cells compared to our 3, and can perceive ultraviolet light and polarization patterns that are completely invisible to us. Some deep-sea fish have tubular eyes that look like binoculars, optimized for capturing the faintest traces of bioluminescence in the eternal dark of the abyss. And there are creatures that don't detect light at all, but navigate using completely different senses. Electric eels and knifefish generate electrical fields and sense distortions in those fields to map their surroundings. Sharks detect the electrical impulses of their prey's muscles through specialized organs called ampullae of Lorenzini. Star-nosed moles have 22 fleshy tentacles on their snouts that can touch 12 objects per second, building a tactile image of their environment faster than you can blink. All of these are solutions to the same fundamental problem, gathering information about the world around you. And they're wildly different from each other. If we can't even predict how a creature on our own planet will solve a given problem, how on earth are we going to predict what a creature on a planet orbiting a red dwarf star in a different galaxy will do? There's another thing that the convergent evolution argument ignores, and this is maybe the most important thing of all. It ignores contingency. History. Evolution doesn't design from scratch. It modifies what already exists. Every organism alive today is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of ancestral solutions, compromises, half-fixes, and repurposed parts. Your backbone was originally a stiffening rod in a primitive aquatic creature. Your inner ear bones were originally jaw bones in a reptilian ancestor. Your hands are modified fins. Every evolutionary solution depends on what came before. And what came before depends on what came before that. And what all the way back to the first self-replicating molecule in some ancient ocean or hydrothermal vent. Change any step in that chain and everything downstream shifts. The specific sequence of mutations, the specific extinction events, the specific environmental changes, they all matter. They're not noise, they're the signal. On another planet, the starting conditions would be different. The sequence of events would be different. The available chemistry would be different. The gravity, atmosphere, radiation, environment, orbital dynamics, tidal forces, magnetic field, all different. Every one of those differences would push evolution down a different path. Not slightly different, radically different, because evolution is not a directed process climbing towards some optimal design. It's a random walk through an unimaginably vast space of possibilities, shaped by local conditions and historical accidents. Let me tell you what I think the most likely form of alien life is. And this is going to disappoint the science fiction fans. Microbes. Single-celled organisms. Or something like single-celled organisms, if the chemistry is different enough that cell is the wrong word. Life on Earth was exclusively microbial for roughly 3 billion years out of the 4 billion years it's existed. Multicellular life is the exception, not the rule. Complex animal life is an even more extreme exception. And intelligent life, we are, as far as we know, the only species on this planet that has ever built a radio telescope. Out of billions of species over billions of years. One, that's not a great batting average if you're looking for humanoid aliens. And consider this cautionary tale. In 1976, NASA landed the Viking probes on Mars. They carried experiments designed to detect life. One of those experiments, the labeled release experiment, actually got a positive result. It added nutrients to Martian soil and detected a release of gas, exactly what you'd expect if microorganisms were metabolizing the food. But other experiments on the same lander didn't confirm biology. And scientists argued for decades about what the results meant. Some said it was life, most said it was exotic chemistry. I know, they're still arguing about it today, almost 50 years later. We sent a robot to another planet specifically to look for life. It found something ambiguous, and we still don't know what it was. That is how hard this problem is. The most abundant life in the universe, if there is life out there, is almost certainly simple, microscopic. Maybe just self-sustaining chemical systems that would look to us like nothing more than a funny stain on a rock, or a weird chemical imbalance in an atmosphere, or a subtle pattern in the composition of an ocean. And even that is an optimistic scenario because we don't actually know how easy it is for life to start. We have exactly one example, one planet where we know life arose, and we don't fully understand how it happened here. The origin of life on Earth is one of the biggest unsolved problems in science. We have hypotheses, good ones, but we don't have a complete step-by-step, experimentally verified account of how non-living chemistry became living biology. Until we do, we can't calculate how probable life is on any given planet. It might be common, it might be extraordinarily rare. We genuinely do not know. And here's one more thing to think about. Even if alien life exists, and even if it's complex, it might be so far into our experience that we'd have to fundamentally rethink what we mean by organism. On Earth, we think of an organism as a bounded entity, of something with a skin, a membrane, an inside and an outside, something you can point to and say, that's the living thing and that's the environment. But why should that be universal? What if alien life is more like a process distributed across a landscape? What if it's more like a weather pattern that sustains itself? What if the meaningful unit isn't an individual, but a network, a web of chemical interactions spread across kilometers of terrain? We already see hints of this on Earth. A forest is, in some sense, a single interconnected system. The trees share nutrients through underground fungal networks, what some ecologists call the wood wide web. A mother tree can recognize her own seedlings among strangers and send them extra nutrients through the fungal connections. Dying trees dump their remaining sugars into the network for others to use. Trees under attack by insects release chemical signals that travel through both air and soil, warning their neighbors to ramp up their defenses. The boundary between one tree and the forest is blurrier than we used to think. The individual, in this context, is partly a fiction. The real unit of biology is the network. Oh, and there are organisms like the honey fungus, Armillaria, which can spread underground across thousands of acres. The largest known Armillaria specimen in the Malheur National Forest in Oregon covers about 2,400 acres. Estimated to be thousands of years old, it's arguably the largest living organism on the planet. Is that one organism or a system? It's genetically identical throughout, but it has no center, no brain, no obvious unity except at the molecular level. The question gets philosophical fast. On another planet with different chemistry, the boundaries might be even blurrier. The organisms might not be discrete objects at all. They might be processes, patterns, flows, something more like a living weather system than a creature, something that maintains its identity not through a membrane or a skin, but through the persistence of a chemical pattern, the way a whirlpool maintains its identity through the persistence of a flow. You can't point to the whirlpool and say, there it is, in the same way you point to a dog. But the whirlpool is a real, stable, self-maintaining structure. It just exists differently than a dog. Let me draw all this together. The reason alien life would look nothing like we imagine is not just that the details would be different, not just that they'd have 6 legs instead of 4, or green skin instead of pink. The reason goes all the way down to the foundations. Different planet means different gravity, atmosphere, temperature, radiation, and available elements. Different starting conditions mean different chemistry. Different chemistry means different molecular building blocks. Different building blocks mean different structures, different metabolism, different ways of storing and transmitting information. Different evolutionary history means different body plans, different solutions, different architectures. The whole stack is different from the atoms up. The humanoid alien of science fiction is a reflection of our own narcissism. It's not a prediction, it's a mirror. We imagine beings that look like us because we can only imagine what we know, and what we know is ourselves. But nature is not limited by our imagination. Nature is not limited by what we've seen or what we can picture. Nature explores possibilities we haven't dreamed of. It builds machines out of parts that don't exist in our world. It solves problems using methods we haven't invented. And it fills niches we didn't know were there. The real lesson from biology, the real lesson from physics, the real lesson from chemistry is this: the space of possible living systems is enormously, absurdly, incomprehensibly larger than the tiny corner occupied by life on Earth. We are one experiment, one data point, one way of being alive, and we have made the classic mistake of confusing a single observation with a universal law. Now, do I think there's life out there? Well, look, I think the universe is vast enough and old enough that it would be astonishing if Earth were the only place where chemistry became interesting enough to sustain itself. But I also think that if we do find life somewhere else, the most important thing about it will be how different it is. Not how similar, because similarity would teach us nothing new. Difference would teach us everything. It would tell us what life actually is, stripped of the parochial details of one small wet rock orbiting one ordinary star. It would tell us the deep principles, the rules that matter, the things that are truly universal versus the things that are merely local. And that, to me, is the most exciting scientific question you can ask. Not is there life out there, but what does alive actually mean? We will not answer that question by looking in the mirror. We will answer it by looking into the unknown and being willing to find something we do not recognize. Right here on our own planet, there are organisms that should have shattered our assumptions long ago. Tardigrades, those microscopic 8-legged creatures barely a millimeter long that can survive temperatures from nearly absolute zero to over 150 degrees Celsius. They can withstand pressure 6,000 times normal atmospheric pressure. They can survive the vacuum and radiation of outer space. They can go 3 decades without food or water. They do this by essentially shutting down all their metabolism, pushing all the water out of their bodies, and curling into a dried-up ball called a tune. No heartbeat, no respiration, no detectable life processes at all. And then years later you add water, and they wake up and walk away like nothing happened. They have a protein called DSUP, which stands for damage suppressor, that literally protects their DNA from ionizing radiation. In 2007, scientists sent tardigrades into low Earth orbit on a European Space Agency mission and exposed them to the vacuum of space, cosmic radiation, and ultraviolet light for 10 days. After they were brought back to Earth and rehydrated, Most of them revived within 30 minutes and went about their lives as if nothing had happened. They are, as far as we know, the first animals to survive unprotected exposure to space. Are they alive during the tune state? By some definitions, barely. They're not metabolizing, they're not growing, they're not reproducing. They're just persisting, waiting, enduring. They are, in a sense, a demonstration of how broad the category alive really is. And they raise an uncomfortable question. If something can sit on a shelf for decades, showing no signs of life, and then spring back to activity when conditions change, where exactly do we draw the line between alive and not alive? And deep in the ocean, near volcanic vents where superheated water blasts out of the Earth's crust at temperatures above 300 degrees, there are entire ecosystems that run on chemistry instead of sunlight. No photosynthesis, no connection to the surface biosphere at all. The base of these food webs is chemosynthesis, bacteria that oxidize hydrogen sulfide, pulling energy from the chemical bonds the way plants pull energy from light. These bacteria coat the surfaces around the vents in thick mats. Tube worms, 1.5 meters long, with no mouth and no digestive system, harbor those bacteria inside specialized organs and live entirely off the chemical energy the bacteria provide. Ghostly white crabs scuttle across mineral chimneys. Shrimp with light-sensing organs on their backs, not their heads, cluster around the vents in dense swarms. These ecosystems were discovered in 1977, and they stunned the scientific world. Before that discovery, every known ecosystem on Earth depended ultimately on sunlight. The food chain always traced back to photosynthesis. The deep-sea vents shattered that assumption. Life, it turned out, didn't need the sun. It just needed an energy gradient, a difference in chemical potential, something out of equilibrium that could be exploited. There are also microorganisms living kilometers deep inside solid rock in tiny pores and fractures, surviving on chemicals that seep through the stone. Some of them reproduce so slowly that a single generation might take hundreds or even thousands of years. By our standards, they barely qualify as alive, but they are alive. They reproduce, they evolve, they persist. And there's a bacterium called Deinococcus radiodurans that can survive radiation doses thousands of times higher than what would kill a human. It does this by having multiple copies of its genome and extraordinarily efficient DNA repair mechanisms. When its DNA gets shattered by radiation, it pieces the fragments back together like a molecular jigsaw puzzle, and it does this fast, sometimes within hours. These are not alien creatures, these are our neighbors. They share our DNA, our genetic code, our basic biochemistry. And they are already strange enough to humble anyone who thinks they know what life looks like. Now multiply that strangeness by a factor of 1 billion, because that's roughly what happens when you change not just the environment but the entire chemistry. When you move from life on Earth in an unusual place to life arising independently from different molecular foundations on a different world. So here is where I leave you, with a thought you cannot easily put down. Every alien you have ever seen in a movie, every extraterrestrial in a television show, every creature on the cover of a science fiction novel was designed by a human brain that could only draw from human experience. We gave them eyes because we have eyes. We gave them mouths because we have mouths. We gave them 2 arms because we have 2 arms. Even the weird aliens, the tentacled things and the insectoid monsters, are just reshuffled parts from Earth's catalog. But real aliens, if they exist, were not designed by human brains. They were designed by the physics and chemistry of their own worlds, by evolutionary processes running on different hardware, different software, different operating systems entirely. They would no more resemble us than a hurricane resembles a symphony. Both are complex, organized, dynamic, sustained by energy flows. But they are not the same kind of thing, and if you showed up expecting one and found the other, you would miss it entirely. The most profound discovery in the history of biology will not be finding life that looks like us out among the stars. It will be finding something alive that we almost fail to recognize as living. Something so different that it expands the very definition of what it means to be. And that discovery will tell us, finally, whether life is a miracle that happened once, or a tendency woven into the fabric of the universe itself. Whether we are alone. Not because the cosmos is empty, but because we've been looking for our own reflection instead of looking for what's actually there. What kind of life do you think we'll find first? Something familiar or something beyond recognition? I'd be very curious to hear what you think.